You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/intotheportal.
Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber A.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And we're back with another Film Friday for you guys.
Yeah, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. Really looking forward to talking about this one, not because it's a famous film or anything like that, but because it's definitely dabbling in things we've talked about at great length in the past.
Exactly.
So pretty excited about it. But before we get right into it, we have some other exciting news for you guys. A brand new release from Be Strange, which we're pretty excited about. We've been working on these designs for a while, and there are 3 new items up in the shop, in the Strange shop at straightupstrange.com. So the Necropolis packable jacket, wind, rain, monster saliva resistant, and it packs into itself. So it's got its own little thylacine-like pouch. It said kangaroo on the main description, but I wanted to change that. We also have our Necropolis basic tee. So it's got the classic pyramid design, super comfy, you guys, just a classic t-shirt that everyone needs for spring and summer. And then, of course,
super soft.
Super soft. It's like, I can't remember the exact blend, but it is listed on our website. It's awesome. And then last but not least, our coffee optional mug, which we had to put in there because we often put things in coffee mugs that are not caffeinated beverages. So wink, wink, not just for coffee, but it's also featuring the really cool Necropolis design. All of these are available in the Strange shop as well as Etsy. And we just want you guys to go check it out. It's really cool. Everything goes towards supporting Straight Up Strange and the network.
Exactly.
So go
all
check
of
it
us
out.
Indie creators out there, and as we know, a lot of people have obviously been in these strange times that the world has been experiencing. And because of that, we have decided, for all of you guys quarantined and self-isolation, all that stuff, we've extended our free shipping offer for Be Strange. So you can just use promo code STRANGESHIP, all one word, at checkout, and you'll get free shipping on your order.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So yeah, go check that out and hit us up and let us know what you think. And if you have any sort of ideas or anything like that, we're always open to. It's an art collective and a project. So we're definitely keen on your feedback.
And one of our designs is obviously very relevant for our movie discussion today. We've got our forest creature available in a few select designs, including the mini Squatch. So that's for toddlers. It's so cute. We couldn't help ourselves.
Perfect segue, really.
Yeah.
Because obviously today we are discussing Big Legend. It is a Amazon Prime film, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Well, we saw it on Amazon Prime.
I don't think it was, as far as I remember, there was no major theatrical release, at least in Canada. Maybe there was in the States. So
it feels like one of those straight to DVDs.
It kind of feels like that.
Or straight to network, I guess.
Right. Not, in the world we live in today. Yeah, not to DVD. But yeah, it's you don't see a lot of Sasquatch movies that really make it to the big screen, I think. There's not really many famous ones. I think maybe people think of The Legend of Boggy Creek, which is more skunk different, but
Harry and the Hendersons, if you want to get a little more playful with it.
Sure. And there's some animated sort of stuff too that features Sasquatch, but this one's a little bit more of a sort of a cult film, you might say.
It's a serious take on it, and it's kind of a very independent, low budget film. I don't know exactly what they spent, but it was low budget.
Definitely. Written and directed by Justin Lee, just a few years old, came out in 2018, but the setting of it is what really intrigued us because it's a familiar territory, right? I'm going to try my best to pronounce this. So it's a very famous national park, one of the oldest national parks in the U.S. This is the Gifford Pinchot National Park.
Yeah, it was actually named after the guy that was part of creating the Federal Land Reserve way back in the day in the U.S.
So a pretty important landmark in for the national parks and just history. And of course an area that's known for some strange things. This is, so located just southwest of Washington, the National Forest. It's around 1,368,300 acres
Holy
of
moly.
forested area, mountains, rivers, valleys, waterfalls, volcanoes, right?
Waterfalls that we saw depicted in the film.
Exactly. Very true. And it's sort of three main areas that break it up, including the Cowlitz Valley, Mount Adams District, and the Mount St. Helens National Volcanic Monument, and that sort of district of the forest.
That's probably one of the most recognizable, like, Mount St. Helens. That's for the eruption and just for its natural splendor too, hey, and for its prevalence of Bigfoot sightings and UFOs too. Yeah, totally.
That too. But yeah, we're definitely getting into some violence, which was a strong aspect of our Sasquatch Encounters series. And if you guys haven't listened to that, we encourage you to go check it out, because there's some strange things that happened around Mount St. Helens that they get right into in this movie.
Yeah.
That's sort of different than quote unquote Sasquatch encounters elsewhere on the continent.
True.
So let's jump into
very territorial behaviors.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get into it. Let's sort of establish the movie, and then we'll break it down and critique it.
The thing that I liked about this movie is that it didn't rely on any elaborate like characterization, like character profiles. It didn't waste any time getting into it.
Right.
Basically, the first thing we see is like some sort of like crossover SUV thing pulling up to this very pristine woodland location. And we see two people emerging from the vehicle, which ends up being the main character, Tyler, and his girlfriend at the time, Natalie. Yeah. And they are excited because they're going on their own mountain adventure off the grid. And it's been a lengthy time apart because Tyler, as we find out, is a military guy. So he's been on leave and he comes back, and the whole premise is that this is the last time. So they're going to be together forever now.
Ominous.
Very ominous. And you see in the very first scene, right, he pulls out the little ring and he's going to propose, and it's like, lots of stuff that they use for like, it's classic tropes, right? But it's used effectively in my mind because it's not overacted. The characters are likable, right? Like in my mind, at least.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. There's even the little bit of kind of shock action right at the beginning where they right, like she jumps on his back from behind and he's like, and it's like,
playful, like whatever. And they're just getting going. So this is just, it's so sad when you just know what's going to happen. Yeah. But I liked it because there's a few lines here early on that are notable for foreshadowing the certain events that are going to take place, such as when they're planning their route, they're both looking at the map, and Tyler points out there's this certain curve in the path, and then it ends. And then from there, that's when they're going off-grid and hiking to this like lake location. He
points out a little lake.
He's got a plan, and he's very focused. He's very capable, and obviously that comes from his military background, I think.
Army Ranger.
Probably just growing up in sort of like a more rural setting, because that's what his mom seems to, when he goes back to her house eventually. But anyways, we're getting ahead of ourselves. So I love this because it says here, the very first one was, it's only fun if no one's been there before. Aha. Dun, dun, dun. How much fun are they going to have? And then, of course, this is another classic line. She's basically kind of calling him out, being like, oh, we're going off grid, hey? Like, huh? And he's like, well, of course it's safe, and we'll just figure it out when we get there. It's kind of what he says to her. And she's like, okay, fine, honey, because she's all under this false sense of protection, I would imagine.
Yeah, at the same time, too, it's like everyone's sort of been in, I mean, not everyone's gone camping off grid per se, but I mean, like, I feel like you and I have said similar things potentially to each other. Many people listening probably have who have gone camping, right? You're just sort of in the woods in Washington. You don't necessarily, like you're not expecting certain things to happen, right? Exactly. You're not in Siberia or something, or you're not wherever.
Oh, totally. Exactly. So you're on a fun little romantic hiking, camping trip where nothing's going to go wrong, and they're just, in their own little world. And they sort of like, they go on their way. They're passing through trees. At this point, they're off the grid, and they walk past several no trespassing signs, but they're scattered on the forest floor. They're hidden in bushes, that type of thing.
Grown over and stuff like that. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And these, like, if you look at them closely, they're not state signs. They're private, it looks like.
Yeah, like they're clearly non-indigenous. Like they're like, they're like aluminum signs, but they're not. Yeah, they're not government state signs, which is weird.
Exactly. And, in this first sort of setting, they do see one of the, Or no. He doesn't. They don't see the tree markings from the indigenous people on their trip, but he does see it when he returns. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Getting ahead of myself again.
But they do encounter some obviously very iconic Bigfoot, Sasquatch. What's the word I'm looking for here? I mean, something we're all familiar with, obviously, which is the knocking right off the bat. That's the very first thing we get. And I guess that's what I did like about this film is like they do use the classic tropes, the classic things that Sasquatch and Bigfoot researchers or people looking for the creature do, look for. Yeah. And they're laying in the tent. And of course, it's the classic wood knocking. And Natalie makes the comment, there's someone's knocking on a door, which is the description we've seen a lot reading different accounts and things like that of people experiencing wood knocking.
Yep.
Something that I have always wanted to hear. I never have when we've been camping in the woods. And I was just saying to Amber before we started recording, I've always kind of wanted to, like I think I have a few times thinking back, drinking a few beers, but you want to do it, but at the same time, you don't necessarily want the response. You don't know what you're going to get in response.
What are you inviting? Yeah.
And that's a line too from the unnamed man that Tyler meets is like curiosity kind of killed the cat for him. And that's why he's ventured further than he had before. It's one of those weird things. I feel that way about cryptozoology a lot. I'm so interested, but also petrified at the same time.
Yeah, it is
in many
terrifying.
Ways. So they hear the knocks, right? It's like a single knock and then followed by obviously this very ominous, low, deep growl, which I thought was pretty convincing, a pretty good monster sound in the distance, Sasquatch sound. And then the dingling of the bells, because Tyler, being sort of like, I guess this is his military background, being an Army Ranger for 12 years, sets up a perimeter, which, I mean, people do that, obviously, like deer lines, trip lines, hunters, things like that. Yeah. I thought it was a little paranoid when I saw that. You know what I mean? Like, it's like I guess he's taking extra precaution, but they're not hunting. And if he really thought it was safe, why would you do that?
Yeah, but you just never know.
I guess. It didn't really help all that much. I was making that comment to you, too. True. It's like you're going to hear a little dingle in the pitch black.
And then you're going to get paranoid.
Now you know something's there. Well, that's great, but what are you going to do?
For me, I was like, as soon as that scene started to play out, and we watched this movie a couple of times, and he leaves the tent, right? As soon as he hears the bell.
Yeah.
And makes the comment, well, it's me, babe. Like, like I can go out and I'll be fine, whatever. So
and
he
he's
leaves
not
her.
wrong.
He leaves her in the tent.
Yeah.
But what I would have done is just stood. If I was him, I would have stood out of the tent, like right beside the tent or even in the tent, but just poking my head out, and then had like some sort of like a spotlight that you could just shine out. So that way you could see if it's a deer, you could see if it's something else.
He had just like a wimpy version of that, like a smaller spotlight that he was kind of holding up like this and trying to...
It's so dark out there. Yeah, it's like you need something that's like a legit, like a car spotlight or something.
Yeah, which he ends up using later on. But so obviously classic sort of horror movie, thriller movie mistake, I guess, in a way. They separate.
Yeah.
And the weakest of the herd gets picked off. As all creatures do.
Yep.
And it's really classic, right? Because it's the Albert Ostman. She gets scooped up. I mean, it's not in his sleep. Like it's the whole tent, but it's the same idea. The Sasquatch just kind of waltzes in. She hears it, but this is the thing too that's so awesome and creepy. It's like this is a massive, like 8+ foot tall or bigger, hundreds of pounds creature that just glides through the woods and across things that make lots of noise, sticks and grass and rocks and stuff. It doesn't make a peep. That's the cool thing about Bigfoot and Sasquatch.
That was the spooky part too. And in this scenario as well, it almost seemed like you could question whether or not there was one creature or possibly even two creatures, right? Because he is almost like deked out unless it was just, it could have been flanking, or it could have just been a very not elaborate, but a setup with the rocks as a distraction, because he does encounter a pile of rocks when he ventures further away from the campsite.
That they stacked up silently, obviously.
Exactly, that they didn't see earlier in the day too, because that was the other question. It's like, well, how long have those rocks been there? Like, it was too close to the camp for them to not notice it before.
Exactly. So I did really enjoy that first scene, honestly. Like, it gets into the action.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I thought it was well done. You don't see too much, and it's not overacted again, in my mind. So it's like, it's a good mix of like, the low budget aspect with the realities of just being in the forest kind of thing.
And I definitely was feeling the vibe of like, what if that was me in that situation? Like the feeling of just like you're in the darkness and your fiance has been scooped away. The tent is gone. He's just spinning in circles, looking everywhere. You don't know which way to run in to try to find her. Like you could, I guess in that moment, he should have been, obviously he's panicking, but you'd be looking on the ground trying to see the drag marks of the tent.
Yeah,
and then
or
heading in that
listening for
direction.
anything.
But pretty sketchy.
So this is where we get the cut to black.
That's right.
Classic. And then fast forward 1 year later, we see Tyler. He has been not incarcerated, but he's being kept at this Cowlitz County psychiatric ward for about a year.
Yeah.
And he has this conversation with a psychiatrist who has opted to kind of, she's sponsoring him to like get out essentially. Like she's like, you're ready. You know, you've worked through all of this: hysteria, delusions, nightmares, and survivor's guilt. Those are like the 4 main things she lists.
Right.
So obviously she's not taking anything he said seriously as far as it being something other than a bear. And he is smart, right? He's not stupid. He's been there for 12 months, so I guess he's learned a lot. But he basically just tells her he's convinced it was a bear attack and goes on his merry way.
And he says it in the most unconvincing way. He's like twiddling with his hands and he's like clearly lying through his teeth.
He is. And then he does make the other comment as he's on his way out the door saying, survivor's guilt. You're implying there was a death. They never found Natalie's body.
Right.
So for him, that's a huge question mark. That's an unanswered thing. And he, as we learn, is one of those guys that doesn't give up until he has the answer.
Yeah.
So that's his huge, like, you know, his character driver, so to speak, and explains, you know, like the further plot events of the movie. So once Tyler goes home with his mom, I loved this part because she is a very sympathetic character and she renews his need for answers, right? She's like, she totally believes him, which is great in my mind. It lends to a more satisfying character, in my opinion, right? He's not fighting against his kin. But once he has this discussion and they kind of like, I love the whole Easter reference, how his mom was like, I didn't raise you this way. Even when you were a kid, you would always be looking for the answers. When we had the Easter egg hunt, you searched all day in every single space just to find all the eggs. And then after that, you were trying to find the bunny himself.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't stop until your father came home with an actual bunny. But even then, you weren't satisfied. And you were asking, how did this Easter bunny like lay these eggs around? Or how did he play? You know, so it's just, it sets the stage for a character that, again, it needs answers, won't quit until they have them. He gets pointed to a bag of items that his mom said the police dropped off. And then from here, we see a suspicious digital camera photo. And it's in the reel of all of them. And he wasn't the one taking the pictures. It was his fiance at the time, Natalie.
And it's like...
It's like this large, dark figure that's just in the background. And it's so freaky. And, you know, it's funny. We were looking up Sasquatch footage. And I actually have, in the show notes for this episode, I will put a link to the video. It's shot by the Washington Sasquatch like research team, and it shows something very similar to what we see in that still. So anyways, if you guys are curious, you can check that out. I'll have that in the links there. But
awesome.
Yeah.
It's strange too though, because it's like, I feel like that happens a lot with photography and video too, where it's like nobody notices until later, obviously, right? So it's like she's just snapping multiple pictures and then there happens to be one on the reel that is featuring something.
Which is very classic, right? That's what happens with a lot of Bigfoot or Sasquatch teams going out in the woods. It's when they review the footage after that they see these things.
It reminds me of Dial-Off Pass. And they
very
find
much,
the photo later on going through the reel, right?
Yeah, that's a good one, yeah.
Yeah. So he, of course... He has this is the catalyst for him going back because he knows that there's more out there. And like you said, his mom is encouraging him rather than being like, oh, you should just move on or
just forget about it, honey. The screams will go away eventually.
Yeah, everyone wants him to look for monsters. I guess that's the nice thing about this. It's like being on it's always moving forward. No one's putting up any roadblocks for him. There's no cops out, you know, he doesn't have to go through like a roadblock and people are, what are you heading back out here for? And like nobody's asking questions, which I guess is kind of good. So he heads back out into the Giffy Pinchot Park.
I had to give it that nickname. Sorry, guys.
We're shortening things here. So he gets out, he arrives once again, packing gats this time, has much more supplies and he's ready to go because he obviously knows that he's going to be dealing with something a little bit more violent, obviously. But this is where we see this weird sign. It's the, how do you pronounce it? Like Xylon?
I would say Xylon.
Incorporated, no trespassing sign, which we mentioned before. Like clearly a non-state sign.
It's private
property, but it's not really. It's
It's in the middle of nowhere.
It reminds me, I guess, a little bit of almost like the Troll Hunter film, where there's sort of this weird organization that has some say and is out there controlling territory. I'm air quoting here.
Yeah.
But
not very effectively.
And he's already being stalked by the big man, which is, of course, the name given by the no-name hunter that he meets after his car gets absolutely annihilated. But before that, there's just little things that start happening. Like his backpack gets stolen when he's cleaning his rifle down by the river.
He was getting some water by the river, and he brings his rifle, thank God.
Yeah.
But he leaves his backpack literally like 12 feet away from him. Like it's a few meters. It's not even that far. And you just see the black shadow, and then it's just gone. Just silent, too, which is freaky, man.
Oh, man. It's funny you say that. Like, good thing he had his rifle, because obviously it would have been taken away or broken.
Yeah, exactly.
But then it also makes me think, it's like, would Sasquatch figure out how to use it?
Oh,
then
true.
it'd be extra dangerous. We've never heard anything like that before.
He'd probably just break it.
They throw rocks and stuff, but
probably snap it in half like a twig.
Monkey see, monkey do, though. I mean, do you think they'd be able to learn?
True, yeah. Well, they don't like fire, so that's another one that kind of delineates their humanity, I guess you could say, to a certain degree.
Right.
I also liked how we saw that really big footprint. And, okay, so this was on the path.
Right.
But it wasn't going with the path. It was going across the path. So he's like kind of like zigzagging around him. It's like, how fast can this thing move? And like, what is, like, you know what I mean? Like, how does he stop?
And he's always watching. And we get that comment too, right? Like, well, you're in luck. He's probably watching us right now.
Exactly, yeah.
So this is the guy that he meets. So he goes back to his vehicle after his backpack's stolen, and it's just he gets attacked. He's like the classic, like shaking of the hood. The car's getting rocked. I loved how they did a tree trunk through the back window. Yeah. That was awesome.
Huge.
And then it's kind of almost comedic how the next guy shows up like 30 seconds later.
Yeah.
Car trouble, chief? Kind of catches him off guard. I really liked that guy, though.
I liked him, too. It was kind of just a very weird, like, you didn't really know how to feel about him right off the bat. So you're like, wait a second, are you, like, not in on it with this other thing, but, like, how much do you know is kind of your first question. Because, like, if you see that scene and then you're like, oh, well, it could have been a bear, but it's like a bear wouldn't throw a log through a car and smash, you know what I mean? Like, use a rock to smash the front of the car too. Like it's the classic Joe Nickel. And rip off the what was it, the door?
Yeah.
And the Joe Nickel.
Yeah, but it's funny because he's saying it in a way that, like, he knows it's not, but it's the way, like, a reporter would try to spin it, or the cops would try to spin it, right? He's like, oh, could it be a bear? I've seen them do it in Alaska.
In Alaska, and maybe he's sizing up Tyler too, hey? Like, he's like, what are you really here for?
Yeah, what do you believe?
Yeah. And what is your answer to this? Like, this just happened to you, obviously, so what are you going to tell me? Like, kind of thing.
And then he shows him. I mean, Tyler's kind of skeptical of him. He thinks for a second maybe you're murdering people and doing weird shit out here. But he's like, you know, I'm a regular dude. I am doing some illegal hunting, but I'm basically just out here because I'm curious. He says he's never seen a company person from this weird clandestine organization, and that he's never gone beyond this perimeter, quote unquote, until that morning when he found Tyler. I guess because he had heard some noises and just decided to go. Lucky for this dude, right? Lucky for Tyler. And of course, he shows him this perimeter.
The perimeter, yeah, it's very spooky. It looks like a shrunken head with, like, embedded into, like, moss and twigs, and then there's a bunch of, like, arrows and twigs and bones sticking out of the tree too.
Very strange.
Creepy.
So he says this is the Chinook peoples that have set these up. They're hundreds of years old, and we don't really know. I loved this line. He's like, it's either it's a perimeter to prevent people from going in, or he's like, or you know, like the smart old buggers or whatever he says, like the wise old bastards wanted to keep something from getting out, implying that they'd created this metaphysical border through magic, essentially, like through
ritual
through things
and
we can't
things,
understand. Which is pretty interesting.
And then he also goes on to say that he doesn't think it's stable anymore because he kind of points to the eruption of Mount St. Helens as one of the reasons. Like, that was a spiritual force much bigger than the perimeter, the boundaries they set up. It's no longer effective, essentially.
It's like the everything's connected kind of paranormal idea, like a metaphysical boundary put up to prevent almost a metaphysical creature, like a not of this regular world type creature, and then this boundary is disrupted by an activity of the earth, like the earth, like it's geological forces, other metaphysical forces, and then an animal. I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's everything all in one.
I like that too because it brings Sasquatch closer to the earth and closer to that sort of metaphysicality, right?
Yeah.
And we've discussed this many of times on the show, like, is Sasquatch a living, breathing, blood-filled creature? Is it something that is more ethereal, more like interdimensional and all that kind of stuff? So it kind of leaves all those doors open for us. But of course, we do get a very visceral example, or several visceral examples throughout the whole movie.
Very much so.
Which was very satisfying too.
Yeah.
Especially the fight scenes. Love the fight scenes.
Yeah.
But anyways, getting back to this whole, like, this notion that they use, this idea of perimeters, like indigenous perimeters and things of that nature. I couldn't really, like, this is one of those things that's, it's probably passed down in Chinook oral tradition if it exists, but protective barriers and tree markings, I didn't find anything that was like specific to like keeping things in or keeping things out,
right,
or even related to Sasquatch specifically. But it is well known that indigenous groups, including Chinook, use trees to mark trails along the forest. So maybe not boundaries per se, but maybe
it does go. I mean, yeah,
and different communicative signals too. Sorry, like they would like manipulate the growth of trees to signal things to other people too. And a lot of symbology and a lot of significance.
In our Sasquatch series, we definitely came across, I mean, yeah, like non-specific markers for Sasquatch, but definitely the idea that, hey, this is Sasquatch territory, we don't go there. It's not necessarily marked or delineated specifically like we see in this movie.
Yeah.
But we definitely came across that. So it's not that much of a leap to think that there would be, for sure. But if anyone out there has more information, please hit us up if you're from the area.
Yeah, if you have any history or knowledge or anything like that.
What did you make of this fight scene?
Okay, so this is just leading up to that big fight scene, actually. There was a few things here. We get the suggestion from the other hunter that they don't like fire, and that's very evident when they come back to the camp, right? Once they've looked at this Chinook perimeter marking, they come back, there's a freaking huge tree log standing upright in the middle of their fire. And he kind of makes the comment, the other hunter, he's like, they don't like it. Pretty obvious, right? And so they're like, okay, so now they know that they've stirred the pot a little bit at this point.
Yeah, because he also says, never seen that one before.
Exactly, yeah. So he's like, and he said himself, he's never gone past those borders until today, those tree marking borders. Yeah. So this is kind of setting the stage for things that are, shit's going to hit the fan, essentially, pretty quick here. And so this is where, exactly, we get to this big fight scene. So they go on a little adventure, a little romp, so to speak, through the woods. And they end up in this lair. It's like the den of the... And the thing is, too, Tyler is the one that hears something. They're walking through the woods together. They both got their guns at the ready. They're like, on watch, on guard. And then essentially Tyler hears something like a whale or like a growl, like some sort of monstrous sound. And so he starts booking it towards that thing because he's still under the assumption that perhaps he could save his fiance if she might be alive still. It's kind of what he is holding out hope. And I feel so bad for him.
It is sad.
It's really sad. And then so he ends up falling into the lair, which was a really effective way of introducing. He's like totally disoriented. He's covered in like blood. It's like the whole grounds of this lair is like seeped and saturated in blood. Right. There's carcasses everywhere, human, like skulls. We've got animal remains. We've got different artifacts, things that this thing has collected over the years, including Tyler's backpack, including the ring too that he gave his fiance. So that's kind of this sad little buttoning up of that hope. No hope.
Unfortunately,
all despair at this point.
I want to jump back. Sorry, just rewind a tiny bit too, because the reason he discovered this lair, I loved the part where I wish this hunter had a name. I wish we had something to call this
Big
guy.
Chief.
Big Chief. He gets smashed in the leg, right? And the classic rock throw of the main defense mechanism of the Bigfoot, the Sasquatch.
It's a boulder. It's not a rock.
Yeah, it's a boulder, and obviously crunches his leg in half, and he essentially makes the decision later on that day that, like, you're not going to make it out of here with me, dragging my ass out of here. He basically commits suicide, takes his hat off, leaves it on the rock, heads out towards where he knows he's going to run into this thing. And we end up with a carnivorous Sasquatch who's literally devouring his insides, like right in his torso as Tyler stumbles into this den. That's definitely more monstrous than we are used to. Like the violent Sasquatch encounters we talked about, they were like attacks and throwing stuff and like maybe scratches and things like that.
Property damage.
Necessarily eating.
No, yeah, it reminds me of the, what's it called? The yellow top, kind of more, carnivorous.
Just real violent.
Quick question for you here. You just made the statement that this has happened in the same day. Like the guy makes the comment. It was actually over a period of a couple days. They're out in the woods. They made two campfires because they end up kind of on that not coastal area. Is it the coast? It's totally the right, Columbia River, I think, is what they're on.
Yes.
And then they make a little camp in the tree line. Tyler tries fishing. He's not getting anything.
You're right. Yeah, it is a couple of days.
There's 2 fires,
totally.
2 nights that they're out there.
Yeah.
So by the 3rd day, he's like, okay, screw this. We're not going to get
And it's
home.
cold.
And that's when the reality sets in and the snow starts falling. Exactly. Yeah. And we get this sort of change. Again, it just becomes more desperate. The feel of the movie, in my opinion. And that's why we get the self-sacrifice, which again is a very noble, he's a good guy, this big chief guy. He left Tyler literally within minutes of Tyler falling asleep at the campfire that night. And then it's the next morning when Tyler wakes up that he hears him screaming. And he's not even that far away. So in my mind, obviously he's got a huge leg injury, so he's not going to get very far.
Right.
But I thought it was like almost like a little unbelievable, like how
close they were.
Yeah, how close they were and just the timeline.
Yeah, it's like, wow, you guys really picked a terrible place to camp.
Yeah. I don't know.
If you actually ended up that close, you think you're getting away, you're just going closer and closer.
Exactly.
Anyway.
Yeah. So anyways, Tyler, obviously he comes to the conclusion that he needs to deal with this on his own. Okay, because we get 2 big fight scenes again. So we get the climax, but we also get the one just before that when we see Big Chief getting devoured and then Tyler getting attacked by this thing.
Yes.
Holy crap. Like how fast is this thing? Because he was booking it like the whole way, and you would think that he'd still be devouring Big Chief, but I guess not.
It's fast, man.
He just abandons that effort and just goes after Tyler instead.
It's like he's doing it just for the sake of doing it, though, too. It's like we don't really know if he's eating him or if he's just like being super violent.
Just butchering him. Yeah, exactly.
It makes you almost question, too, because we said off the top this idea that there appear to be multiples, like more than one.
Perhaps. We never see more than one.
We don't. We don't see more than one. It's just this main thing. And it's implied that it's just one in the title, like big legend, I guess.
True,
kind of like it's this one big, really mean thing that destroys humans and is a man stealer. Mm-hmm. But it almost... I can't remember if we even talked about this in our Sasquatch series, but the idea of just different personalities essentially amongst Sasquatch, very much like humans.
Oh, yeah.
Like if you run into a homicidal maniac of a Sasquatch, it's going to be a different scenario than Albert Ostman, who gets out unscathed.
Oh, yeah, totally. Or even your perceived interaction or the perception of you from their side, like whether or not, say, this Sasquatch, you're like literally in its den. So it's going to be pissed off, just like someone would be like, someone's trespassing on my property versus you're just out at the store doing some foraging in a field somewhere that's not yours. And then you just happen to see someone like, you're like, oh, okay, I'm just going to go this way and you go that way kind of thing. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very different.
Let's get to the climax here before we get into our discussion.
Sure.
I like this. We get another symbol of this big fire. So this is like Tyler's regenesis, in my opinion. We get the full moon symbol as well.
Yeah.
It's like this turning over, right? And like a new beginning almost, where he's like, screw this, I'm ending this now kind of thing. And he has a pretty good plan. You know, he sets up the car. He's basically sacrificing the campsite that the big chief has created, and he's going to lure this thing to its fiery death, supposedly using propane or not propane, it was gasoline.
Yeah, he sets up this kind of like a booby trap, essentially. He shaves himself a spear. He's just kind of hiding behind a tree, and it's
using all of his military skills.
Yeah. I mean, I guess in that sense, it was kind of unbelievable. It's so funny, like we're talking about Sasquatch, but this idea that like you could stay hidden, like you could just crouch down behind a tree and like be able to ambush something that's like its greatest skill is being extremely quiet and watching you at all times in the woods. Like it would have been watching this setup the entire time.
Yeah, exactly. And it did kind of sneak up on him, hey? Like he had that sheet kind of, and then he ends up attacking him through the sheet because he gets just like the hint out of the corner of his eye that it's like behind him. So he could have gotten
perfect way of being able to have a close-up scene too without that slower moving than like the flashes of the creature, the face of the beast, but really briefly. Whereas like walking behind, it's just the silhouette. It's kind of like the cheap version of being able to have a close encounter, right? Mm-hmm. Because we don't know what the budget was, but...
It was very low.
Anyway.
Yeah, we should look into that.
So we have some discussion and some stuff we're going to come back to, like Ape Canyon and some theories and sort of things like that to tie into the movie as we critique it. But before we do, we have a little short break for our sponsor, BetterHelp.
We here at Into the Portal know that there are many out there who suffer from thoughts and feelings that interfere with overall happiness and well-being. I'd say that's especially true in these strange times we find ourselves in most recently, here in Canada and around the world. BetterHelp is there for you, with licensed professional counselors who are available remotely in a safe and private online environment.
Yeah, totally. It's amazing how modern technology can enable us to get the help we need on our own time and through your own preferred methods of contact, including secure video or phone sessions, plus online chat and text messaging with your therapist too.
What's really great is how BetterHelp is available worldwide. Anything you share with your specially matched therapist is completely confidential, and you can change counselors at any time for no additional fee.
BetterHelp has licensed professionals who are specialized in everything from depression, anxiety, family conflicts, and many other areas that may not be locally available to you.
And best of all, it's truly affordable. And all Into the Portal listeners get 10% off your first month using discount code PORTAL. So why not get started today? Go to betterhelp.com/portal. That's PORTAL. Simply fill out a questionnaire to help them assess your needs and get matched with a counselor that can make a difference in your life. That's betterhelp.com/portal using discount code PORTAL. PORTAL. Let's get into some discussion here about the setting of the film and even just this whole society of monster hunters that we're introduced to at the very end of the film, hey?
Yeah.
That was kind of interesting, and that takes it to the next level, in my opinion. It's not
Definitely.
just a Bigfoot film. It's going to be something much more than that, and they kind of imply the two main characters, like the guy in the wheelchair, and then Tyler will be back in the Monster Chronicles.
Yeah, which I'm looking forward to.
Still in development.
It wasn't, it hopefully will be out sometime soon. Might be pushed back because of all this madness that's going on right now.
I hope not.
But it's just kind of funny, this idea that like Sasquatch and Bigfoot classically are lumped in with monsters everywhere, right? You think of like the big three. It's like Nessie, Sasquatch, and, I don't know, Mothman. Or the Jersey Devil or something.
Yeah,
right?
I wonder where they're going to go with that.
So it's going to be interesting to see.
Exactly.
But what we really did enjoy about this a movie, and we mentioned it off the top, was like they stayed true to obviously the location of where lots of crazy stuff happens, right? This national forest, Mount St. Helens, and it reminded us a lot of obviously Ape Canyon and the violent attacks that took place there. And we're not going to get into the full story or anything. You guys should definitely go back and listen to our Strange Sasquatch Encounters series, and we definitely get into detail on this story. But essentially, it was 5 prospectors, right? It was Marion Smith, his son Roy Smith, Fred Beck was the main guy in this. Gabe Lefebvre,
Right.
John Peterson. 1924, essentially, they provoked and were attacked by a group of Sasquatch, is the long and short of the story. Massive boulders being thrown against the side of their cabin. And it's just kind of reminiscent of this tale because it's like clearly this area is very, very territorial Sasquatch.
Yes.
Where they get mad.
Violent.
Right?
That's interesting, yeah. The whole idea of the rock throwing. Yeah, that parallels a lot of this film.
Right. And they did stay true to the indigenous aspect too without actually really including them at all. Obviously, there's just the references with the tree markings and stuff. And I think it would have given the film way more depth if they had an actual... like if they had a discussion with an indigenous member and were trying to figure out, like doing some detective work and being like, what's with this boundary? Was the boundary broken when the volcano erupted? Something along those lines to make it seem more real. You know what I mean?
Get that alternative perspective.
Yeah. And we do know that in this area of Ape Canyon, Washington, Mount St. Helens, this kind of stuff, the various different groups of indigenous peoples that live in this area and speak different sort of variations of languages there, we're used to encountering a legendary race of 7 to 8 foot tall hairy hominids. And we talked about this in our series, right? That supposedly have essentially supernatural powers or special strength and abilities, like being able to throw boulders that humans shouldn't be able to throw, right? And this is corroborated by some pretty interesting, I guess, European or early settler accounts that we've talked about. But I wanted to just pull up this one because it's ominous and really cool. This was Reverend Elkanah Walker. He was an American missionary, a pioneer in Washington State, and he documented a lot of different stories that were passed down to him by indigenous peoples in the area of everywhere from Spokane, Washington, ranging through Mount Rainier, lots of different places where people had been. Mount Rainier, that reminds me of the UFO remark you made off the top of the show too.
Totally.
Hey, Bigfoot and UFO, they're often correlated. We're not going to get into that today. But anyway, this was a quote from him about these giant creatures. They, the different indigenous tribes, believe in a race of giants, which inhabit a certain mountain off to the west of us. This mountain is covered with perpetual snow. They, the creatures, inhabit these snowy peaks. They hunt and do all their work at night. They are men stealers. They come to the people's lodges at night when the people are asleep and take them and put them under their skins and take them to their place of abode without even waking. Their track is 1.5 feet long. They steal salmon from Indian nets and eat them raw as bears do. If the people are awake, they always know when they are coming very near by their strong smell that is most intolerable. It is not uncommon for them to come in the night and give 3 whistles, and then the stones will begin to hit their houses.
Freaky, man.
Very, very strange, very freaky.
So we have lots of references here. We've got the idea that they live off in the mountains. The perpetual snow, that reminds me of like Abominable Snowman.
Yeah, it does kind of, but Mount St. Helens, and obviously there's very high peaks in Washington.
Exactly. The idea that they're taking people, so they're kidnapping victims, that's interesting as well. The tracks being 1.5 feet long, that's very consistent with a lot of accounts. Eating salmon raw, definitely, yeah. And the smell, that's another really common trope. And the stones.
Yeah.
Hitting houses. Hey, so that's another, yeah.
The Ape Canyon and the guy getting his leg broken in Big Legend. Mm-hmm. So clearly, it's not quite the same as like the BC coast. There doesn't seem to be violent encounters like this in BC. As you move a little bit further south into Washington, there's stories about this that have definitely inspired this movie.
Maybe people are a little bit brasher down there and they're like going into these areas where they shouldn't versus heeding the warnings. Maybe us Canadians are a little more timid.
I guess so, potentially.
That's interesting though, because this area, obviously very ubiquitous with UFO. I keep wanting to say UFO sightings. Holy crap.
Hey, you're drawing black lines here. They're correlated.
Has anyone watched the Skinwalker Ranch thing?
They're connected.
UFO? Anyway, but over the years, there have been many reported sightings of Sasquatch or Bigfoot, etc. And to the extent that the county has actually passed a law protecting Sasquatch from being shot.
Nice.
And if you do end up shooting these things, you have a penalty of $1,000 worth of fines and 1 year jail time. Mm-hmm. I will say here, this law was... They made it sound funner by using Sasquatch as like, the main, but it was actually more so to protect elk that were actually being shot by people that thought they were shooting Bigfoot. So kind of sad. Kind of sad. Yeah, but anyways,
very sad.
There was another, it was so funny. It was a April Fool's joke article from the U.S. government that was acknowledging the existence of Bigfoot. I'll put that in the show notes as well because that's a really fun one.
Definitely.
I also found, just before I move on, there was this guy, so... pretty funny. I was like, at first, I literally thought this was a real article, and I was like, this can't be real. Because they were referring to this guy, Thaddeus Gutenberg, who was supposedly a researcher with the U.S. Forest Service Mythical Wildlife Division, which was after our discussion of Troll Hunter, I was like, oh my God, is this something that actually exists? But no, definitely a joke. There was this other one I found. It was a WordPress blog called Today in Bigfoot History, and comes across as very spoofy, very satirical. But I liked this too because they had one that was a sighting, supposedly from 1996 at the Gifford Pinchot National Forest, Washington.
All right.
And this was a Bigfoot seen foraging with a large stick. A woman by the name of Tony Boney was hiking around Gifford when she came across a startling sight. The story goes on to say, just on the other side of a small creek, she saw a bulky animal man form hunched over a pile of wet leaves. Tony crept closer. She thought it may have been a hunter who lost contact lenses, but as she got closer, she was overwhelmed by a powerful stench. As her nose filled with the pungent odor, she realized she was almost face to face with a genuine Bigfoot. And then she also witnessed the creature using a large stick to forage around this wet pile of leaves. It seemed to be picking at slugs and other gross insects and putting them in a small pile. And then the story ends by saying, totally disgusted, Tony crept away. I'm pretty sure Bigfoot would have heard you. But anyways.
Yeah.
I just like that. Tony Boney.
Tony Boney.
1996.
Yeah, that's pretty hilarious.
If Tony Boney actually exists, I'm sorry if I'm just making a spoof out of your name.
Yeah, sorry to Tony or any Tony Bonies out there. I do this.
Or Tony Pepperonis.
Yeah, those too. That brings up a sort of an interesting thought. It reminds me of what we talked about with, what was this? I can't remember which episode. The idea of different monsters smelling bad because of what they eat, obviously. Like people think they might have encountered a monster when it actually was something more of the sort of like a bear or something, but their breath is terrible because they're eating fish and eating, they're omnivores or whatever it might be, right? But for a Sasquatch in this area to smell worse or different than in a different area, that sort of maybe speaks to that, what they're eating. If they really are consuming human flesh, then that makes sense. As opposed to because obviously all animals are dirty, but you don't smell a deer walking by per se. The dog definitely does, but we don't.
Scent glands,
You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It doesn't smell like death and decay.
It's not like the death flower.
No.
On a more serious note, though, I did come across some interesting footage that I think I already alluded to earlier in the episode, if I'm not mistaken.
You did.
The Washington Sasquatch Research Team, they've had several excursions into the woods over the years. It's all listed on their website, too. I should just include a link to that.
Totally.
But they had this video that was really freaky. So this was from a GoPro that was mounted on the back of someone's head. So as they're walking through the woods, you get the back shot of what's behind them. And they had several weird cases. So some of it was audio. So you hear, I think, I wasn't actually quite clear on this, but I think they were doing the wood knocking, and then you hear a scream after the third knock. It's like this wailing scream far off in the distance.
Interesting.
It's very faint though, so you have to have your volume up full blast.
Right.
And then as well, you also see footage of what is described as a peeker, something that it quickly pops its head up and pops it back down. And then as well, a silhouette of a supposed Bigfoot or Sasquatch that emerges from behind a tree in the forest distance, which was really freaky. And that's what I was talking about right off the bat when I was that looks like that photo, the still from the movie Big Legend.
Totally.
But anyways, yeah, that was a really interesting little thing. And they have a lot to say. If you go on their website, we'll have the link there so you guys can check it out.
Yeah, you should definitely check it out.
Their efforts are genuine. Anyways, let's get into maybe a couple. We've already kind of discussed a lot of these aspects of Bigfoot as portrayed in the film, what we thought of them.
I guess we're coming down to the end here, you guys. And overall, I mean, we're going to make a recommendation and have final thoughts on what we thought of this movie, Big Legend. But yeah, we've mentioned a few of these things, but we have this list because they did a decent job of mentioning or at least touching on some of these classic tropes. The wood knocking right off the top, that's the perfect one to kick off the movie rather than throwing rocks or anything like that. It's the most what's the word I'm looking for? The least aggressive, the most common, the most standard Bigfoot relation, right? Mm-hmm. Then the piles of rocks, which reminded just me of Inuksuks that we see all over the place here because people make them every time they go for a hike around here. Mm-hmm. Aggressive territorial behavior, very specific just to this region, it seems like, and the East Coast and yellow top, like you mentioned, but not necessarily ubiquitous with Sasquatch, which is kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. The nest or the den was weird.
That was interesting. Yeah, we've kind of, it wasn't really, it was just this sunken area that was just saturated. And it had some tree stumps kind of around it. And it was a bit on higher ground. So I guess that made sense that way. But it didn't have any other shelter or any twigs or sticks. Some people, we've seen this in the past when we were researching for our Sasquatch series, the idea that they might build these twig-like nests and things like that, these structures. We didn't see any of that.
No, but I mean, that's ubiquitous across, the Ohio grassman, people would find those, right? Domes of little nests and things. I almost thought that that's what Tyler was burning in that one scene. He had found that, but then it's clearly no, that's just a big pile of wood to make a fire.
Just a big bonfire.
Not quite big enough. Mm-hmm. Classic footprint, obviously. The most iconic of anything. And this is in the area, again, of another famous thing we mentioned in the series, the Skookum cast. Mm-hmm. And the whole idea of Skookum, which is a Chinook word, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to double check on that again. But for, swift water, swift moving, and was applied to the Sasquatch because of how it moves, right? Which we get in this movie as well. Mm-hmm. The markings on the trees were really cool, but like we said, we couldn't find anything to really, really dig into that. Mm-hmm. So if you guys know anything, please hit us up.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, not liking fire.
Yeah.
So if you stay near a campfire when you're hearing strange howling or wood knocking and you don't want things to come closer, I guess that's the trick.
Yeah. Light a big fire or light a perimeter of fires around you and then you're safe.
Just as long as it's not forest fire season, I guess.
Make sure it's contained.
What's worse? I don't know.
Eh.
Ultimately, I mean, what are your final thoughts on this movie? And yeah.
I would have to say I was very pleasantly surprised by this movie. We have, especially since we've been laid off, like we've been like scrolling through the endless lists of movies on Prime, on Netflix, and all these things. And a lot of the times you're immediately disappointed by these films. And especially when it is these low budget independent type films that are depicting very quintessential characters such as Bigfoot, right?
Yeah.
For me, I was just like, this was an effective film. I liked the characters. I liked the setup. Obviously for us too, like this was kind of the storyline of the couple is very relevant, and the idea of being engaged and all that stuff. Like you're just starting your lives and then all this happens. So that was effective. And then all the other characters were effective too. Like the guy at the very end in the wheelchair that's connected to the Xylon Incorporated perhaps, or even like the nurse at the end, and even his psychiatrist. Like everyone did a good job.
Yeah, like it's clearly not...
And his mom.
And his mom. It got poor reviews.
Yeah.
Critic reviews and overall audience reviews was kind of like varying depending on where you look.
What was some of the main criticisms? Do you remember?
The main thing I think I saw was like it seemed the critics were saying slow-footed, like didn't really... But it was a simple movie. Like here's the thing, when you're dealing with a Bigfoot a Bigfoot movie, a Bigfoot thriller, one, it's hard to make it serious because you're dealing with Bigfoot, right? And two, it's hard to incorporate a ton of depth without making it a 2.5 hour long movie.
Or just making it something that it's not about, right? Like making it about the humans versus the like the classic Walking Dead thing.
Exactly.
Like,
So for that, it did a really great job because like you guys know I love this. It gets right into the action. And I was pretty satisfied with the actual creature.
And it tees it up for the Monster Chronicles, which I was not expecting at all. I was like, what?
Totally.
No way. I'm stoked on that.
So this is not an in-depth, really deep, brooding historical look and then like layered underneath like a thriller. It's just a thriller.
Yeah.
But if you're familiar with Sasquatch, if you listen to our show and you've already got the kind of basis of the legend and you're not just watching it as a pure monster movie, you can kind of layer that in for yourself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
totally.
And I think that's why it got poor reviews from critics. They're looking at it being like, this is just sort of a monster movie. Mm-hmm. But if you're interested in Bigfoot, it's much more fun than that.
It is, yeah.
So I would definitely recommend it because it's just pure
It's
fun.
great. Yeah, it is fun.
No risk fun.
Some good violence, if you're into that kind of action and all that. And like a little bit of romance, but not too much cheesy gushiness.
Yeah. But it definitely makes me second guess doing my own wood knocking and sort of like snooping around when we're off grid in the woods.
Oh, yeah.
That's for sure.
We'll be careful.
So we want to hear what you guys have to say. Have you done any wood knocking? Would you do some wood knocking? And have you gone camping in this area? I know we've got listeners in Washington State. So hit us up. You can always send us an email into the portal mailbox@gmail.com or hit us up on our social media. So come join us in our Facebook community. We have a really cool private group on there that you can join. All you have to do is tell us what your favorite episode of Into the Portal was and your favorite paranormal topic. And
you're in.
Yeah, and you're in. And we love chatting with people in there and stuff like that. Hit us up, straightupstrange.com. And don't forget, you guys can use the promo code STRANGESHIP for free shipping. And we have a bunch of really cool new design releases on our website there.
Yep.
Couple new things coming down too. We got the blog that's going to be coming back soon for Straight
Hopefully,
Up Strange.
Strange Times is in the making again.
All that fun stuff.
2.0.
But as always, thank you so much for listening to Into the Portal.
Your gateway to the bizarre. This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.